Welcome, everybody, to our Building Tomorrow Getting Resilient Infrastructure Projects Ready to Financing webinar. I'm delighted that you are all able to make it and really appreciate you taking the time at 2 p.m. Eastern Time of your day to join us. A couple of housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available on the Getting Ready to Finance Toolkit page. On today's session, we are using a translations tool called Wordly, and you will be able to follow the webinar in a language of your choice. Shortly, you will receive a pop-up window on your screen informing you that the translation is now available. Through the app icon on the bottom of your screen. If you have trouble accessing this feature, please let us know, and one of our ICLEI colleagues will get back to you shortly. So my name is Adrián Tóth, and I'm a climate change program lead at ICLEI Canada, and I will be the moderator during this webinar. And I'm also joined by many ICLEI colleagues here today, Eva, Kurnis, Ari, Hiba, and our Financing Resilient Infrastructure project partners and participants, which we will introduce in a little bit. I want to begin today's session, of course, by acknowledging that our work happens across Turtle Island, which has traditionally been and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples since time immemorial. We recognize that reconciliation is a fundamental component to building net zero resilient communities. We are committed to strengthening relationships with Indigenous groups and knowledge keepers, knowing that reconciliation requires ongoing learning, unlearning, reflection, and action. We endeavor to listen to and learn from Indigenous peoples on an ongoing basis in the process of our work. Now, if you'd like to take a moment and put in the chat where you are located at the moment, we would love to know where we are all joining in today's webinar. So our agenda here today, we are going to spend the first 10 minutes to talk about the Financing Resilient Infrastructure project and why this topic is important for Canadian municipalities. Then we will have two presentations from FRIP project participants, 10 minutes each on resilient infrastructure projects. Following the presentations, we'll be officially launching the Getting Ready to Finance Toolkit, and you will be able to hear from what the toolkit contains and how different elements could be useful for your municipalities when it comes to getting ready to finance resilient infrastructure projects. But then we will all come back together for a panel discussion on innovative financing solutions. I'm seeing in the chat now that the Wordly translation is we're having a little technical difficulties, but I will reshare now the link, and all participants should receive a little pop-up window for the translation. Now, why financing resilient infrastructure? The risks are clear, and our communities need resilient infrastructure. We know this is a crucial topic for Canadian municipalities preparing for the impacts of climate change. But the challenge is it must be both sustainable and financially viable. And that's where innovative financing comes in. To build resiliency at the local level, we need new and innovative financing approaches. Such approaches need to include mechanisms that can be used to acquire, structure, govern, and allocate financial resources towards resilience infrastructure. In addition, financial resources must come from a variety of sources, including financial institutions, private investors, and institutional investors, to support and complement traditional sources of public funding. So let's explore how we can build tomorrow's infrastructure today. Over the course of 2023, 10 Canadian municipalities worked in partnership with ICLEI Canada and cooperators on the Financing Resilient Infrastructure project to identify a suite of possible resilient infrastructure projects that private investors could help finance. A core component of FRIP was to connect municipalities, practitioners with financial experts from both the private and public sectors. Now, on the next slide, we see a map of the 10 municipalities that participated in the project from east to west, and we will hear from 2 of them today during this webinar. Through FRIP, municipal practitioners examined a range of possible projects that could be implemented in their communities and worked to identify possible financial instruments that could be used to finance their implementation. And here you can see on the slide 6 different project types that the municipalities focused on, ranging from flood resilience, water and wastewater system resilience, wildfire resilience, just to mention a couple of them. Now, these projects addressed different climate hazards, and along with the tools that were used to identify and prepare them for financing, have been compiled into the Getting Ready to Finance Toolkit. And we will hear more about the toolkit in about half an hour from now, so please stick around until the launch of the toolkit. The toolkit was developed by ICLEI Canada and cooperators to FRIP, and we are gratefully acknowledged that this project was undertaken with the financial support of cooperators. We would also like to acknowledge the municipal staff, financial experts, and FRIP advisory group who were instrumental in the creation of this resource. And many of them are on the call today here. And with that, I will now pass it over to 2 or 3 presenters. First, we have cooperators presented by Chad Park, Vice President of Sustainability and Citizenship at Cooperators, and Paul Manias, Special Advisor of Climate Resilient Infrastructure at Addenda Capital, who will talk a bit more about the Financing Resilient Infrastructure project. Following that, we'll have a presentation from the city of Saskatoon. We are lucky to have Erin Placatka join us today, who is the Climate Adaptation Specialist with the city. And we will also hear from the city of Laval, and Dominique Bastien will present on behalf of the city. Following the presentations from the 2 municipalities, my colleague Eva Jackson, Managing Director at ICLEI Canada, will present the Getting Ready to Finance Toolkit developed through the project. And finally, we will all reconvene with all the speakers today for a panel discussion about innovative financing solutions with an option for a Q&A from the audience. So please keep your questions and add them into the chat, and our colleagues at ICLEI will bring them to my attention, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So with that, I will now pass it over to Chad and Paul, and we'll get started with the first reflections on the FRIP project.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. I'll get started. It's really great to be here. And I'm going to open up with just a little bit of context for why Cooperators is part of this, and what we we're hoping for and are really pleased about in terms of this work. You see on the slide a few things. One thing you see is our organization's purpose, which is financial security for Canadians and our communities. What some people don't know, even though it's in the name, is that Cooperators is also a cooperative, and that means that one of the things that means is that we take our purpose very seriously. This is why we exist. And so while the transactional elements of insurance, investments, advice, and so on are fundamental to our business, at the end of the day, financial security is really all about ensuring that the people we serve have the means to meet their needs today and tomorrow and long into the future. And we think about that in a very integrated and holistic way. And when you think of it that way, climate change is a direct threat to our purpose. So climate change is a direct threat to the financial security of Canadians and our communities. We know that climate change is getting costlier for Canadians and our economy. Insured losses of 3.1 billion in 2023, and about 3 times higher for non-insured losses. So really, these are dollar figures, but they're also incalculable human and emotional costs that come with these impacts. And of course, the good news is there's lots of effort underway to mitigate climate change, and those efforts are really expanding. Governments and businesses, have set net zero targets, and we're really ramping up the level of investment to reduce emissions and address the root causes of climate change. But reducing emissions is only one side of the solution. That we also need more investment in helping communities adapt to climate change. And our view is that there's no smooth transition to a net zero future without enhancing resilience along the way. So it's not even that they're two sides of the same coin. It's actually that resilience is key to achieving our net zero goals as well. So we're aware that a funding gap exists to help our communities meet their climate resilience goals. I think the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has estimated that adapting the infrastructure to avoid the worst impacts of climate change will require investment of $5.3 billion per year. And really, that's just a fraction of the total predicted costs of loss and damage from accelerating climate change. So we've got programs in place in Canada, programs like DMAF and the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, the Green Municipal Funds, and they'll take us part of the way there, but there's still a significant and growing gap. And so we acknowledge that that's the case, and yet it's really on the big picture. There's a clear economic case for preventing loss instead of having to clean it up. So that's part of what motivates us to be part of this. And I'll pass it over to Paul to elaborate a little bit.
Sure. Thanks, Chad. I appreciate that. So, as Chad was saying, resilience has been something that has been on the cooperators' mind for a long time, not just in its activities, but also within its investment portfolio. So as Adrián had mentioned, I sit as an advisor to Addenda Capital, which is the investment arm of the cooperators. And I joined specifically to help work on this project around resiliency. I got involved in climate and investing in climate-related activities many years ago. I spent a dozen years working at a large Canadian pension plan, the OMERS pension plan, which represents the Ontario municipal workers, and spent a number of years within their infrastructure group. And so starting in the early 2010s, I really witnessed and was lucky to participate in a lot of the financing activities that went into a lot of our decarbonization activities, the build out of renewable infrastructure, the movement into energy storage, and the like. And I was speaking to colleagues at cooperators in Addenda, and really we were talking about some of the challenges in financing adaptation and resilience. And one of the fundamental challenges, and one of the reasons I joined and I'm so excited to participate in this project, is this is an area that really requires a lot of innovation, financial innovation. That financial innovation really goes to the fact that unlike many renewables or other decarbonization projects, resiliency and adaptation doesn't inherently have a very obvious and direct cash flow. So something that can be used to effectively pay investors a return on their investment. And so that challenge, if you think about a typical piece of resilient infrastructure, a flood wall as an example, it is very much so a piece of concrete, or maybe a nature-based solution, but in effect, it's a static piece of infrastructure that serves a great purpose, but doesn't have that inherent cash flow. And so one of the interesting parts of this project was really how do we think about addressing that gap that Chad mentioned that FCM has talked about, which is a gap of over $3 billion annually in the difference between the need to invest in adaptive infrastructure and available public funds. How do we bring the private sector forward with innovative financing solutions that allow a return on investment to be generated and the capital to be deployed? And so as we talked about that and we started having a lot of great conversations, we inevitably turned to one of our core partners who we'd worked with in the past, ICLEI, around bringing together ultimately what resulted in FRIP as a way of bringing together various stakeholders in what is very much a whole of society approach, from really what the National Adaptation Strategy has talked about as a necessary component of building resiliency across our communities, bringing all these groups together and really starting to establish, a working group and a program to understand some of the unique challenges that municipalities, large and small, face in both planning for adaptive infrastructure, generally speaking, and then moreover, helping to bring innovative financial solutions to bear to bring private capital in to pay for, to pay for a lot of that infrastructure. And so ultimately, as you'll hear from our two participants, we had a number of sessions. Hopefully, all of our participants gained. We certainly did on the cooperators and Addenda side in terms of expanding our knowledge and understanding, and ultimately resulted in a set of tools which Eva will highlight, which we think are highly valuable, regardless, frankly, of where the financing solution comes from. So in the short term, I would say this FRIP program has really helped, cooperators and hopefully the municipalities participating as kind of capacity building, helping think and design those types of programs. Longer term, we hope at the cooperators, not just for ourselves, but for all private investors, that this will start to build a pipeline of financeable infrastructure projects, which really address, key needs in building out, our resilience globally. So with that, I'll stop. Thanks for giving us some time to explain why we got involved. Thanks, Adrián.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, for bringing in what the FRIP project was all about and all of the innovative thinking that went into the last 14 or so months with the 10 municipalities, thinking through what are the challenges of how to calculate the return on investment, understanding and designing some of the tools that will be hopefully helpful for other municipalities as well who are planning to design resilient infrastructure projects as well. And with that, Erin Placatka, I think you should be all set up for our team will assist with the slide progress and as we head over to the city of Saskatoon.
Great, thank you, Adrián. And I'm very happy to be joining you all here today from Saskatoon. I'll begin by acknowledging that I am joining from the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6 territory. And that the city of Saskatoon and all of us living here from the broader Treaty 6 territories are beneficiaries of this peace and friendship treaty. And building on that, I think knowing the land that we're located on is critical to talking about climate adaptation. So to give you a little bit of context, we are a prairie city located along the South Saskatchewan River, which connects us upstream through the Bow River to Calgary and downstream to the river deltas in Manitoba. Most folks in Canada know our climate and the climate of maybe our prairie neighbors for our cold winters. And we do have those. We're in the middle of a cold snap right now. But in the prairies, we move between extremes. So we have our minus 30 days in the winter, and then we move to plus 30 or 35 in the summertime. We get storms and heavy rain. We get drought paired with that scorching heat. And in recent years, we're realizing that we need to learn how to live through those hot days when we're also experiencing thick wildfire smoke. But this week we are digging out from a large winter storm, and I have never seen our city more grateful or excited for a March snowstorm. Next slide, please. So with that context of Saskatoon in mind, one project we explored early in this project was looking to address those storm events with heavy rainfall using something called dry ponds. So these are park spaces that outside of a storm event function as usable green space. But because of that depression in the land and using the slope of the stormwater pipes, they will fill up with stormwater in a major rain event, then drain quickly through gravity after the rain ends. They're built in proximity to the worst hit areas of the city where we know there's the greatest flood risk from storms, and they often increase the usability of a park, moving it from what might be a nondescript, flat piece of turf to something with more features and interest for residents. And this is a project example where it actually could make a lot of sense to pursue financing. So it had some features that work in its favor. Each individual project is pricey in the range of several million per pond, and we're planning to build a series of them. There are clearly defined beneficiaries. We know what properties flood near these locations, under what level of precipitation, and what level of precipitation the pond will protect against. Finally, the benefits are also trackable and immediately visible. This project pictured here protected residential properties almost immediately after it was constructed, with a major rainfall event that otherwise would have flooded those basements. However, on these particular projects, we were already pursuing grant funding, so we didn't actually explore it further with this project. Next slide. Instead, we tried to think about what the next piece of the puzzle on stormwater management was. And that's for us considering stormwater as a whole system. So storm ponds can look like the purpose-built dry pond on the previous slide, or it can look like something like this, which is just a wetland in a naturalized park. A project to increase the resilience of our entire stormwater system includes a suite of upgrades, such as restoring or maintaining wetlands, adding naturalized plantings to ditches and culverts, and exploring low-impact development changes like increased permeable surfaces. This sort of project, though, was a bit more challenging to think about how it would work with financing. It's many smaller upgrades across a larger area, and it's a larger group of potential beneficiaries. The benefits are harder to quantify, not necessarily impossible, but it's not as dramatic of a change as with a localized dry pond. The potential solution we could think of that might work is to bundle the work neighborhood by neighborhood. So apply upgrades to the system in one area of the city and try to quantify the benefits that the residents in that neighborhood receive from the upgrades. Next slide. Our final project is one I'm really excited about because it brings together a whole list of possible benefits. So our fire stations here in the city are all built in this traditional standalone building model. And as the city is growing, more stations are needed to serve new areas, plus older stations are becoming due for replacement. There is an opportunity then to make better, more efficient use of city land and co-locate a fire station with affordable housing in a multi-level climate resilient building. The fire department is wonderfully a natural partner on climate resilience because the same hazards that we are preparing for and trying to address through resilient infrastructure are the hazards that fire is worried about and addressing on a day-to-day basis. They are also a strong partner here in Saskatoon on addressing the housing crisis. So this project is near and dear to my heart because it tackles multiple crises at once, housing and climate. And building resilience into the physical building of a shared space lets that resilience benefit both the housing units, addressing the real safety risk of heat and air quality in multi-unit buildings, and increases the resilience of critical emergency infrastructure. The challenge, of course, is how to loop in the idea of this overall project we're trying to talk about here today. Is there a cash flow? And for the most part, no. This one looks like something where we'd pursue more typical funding, such as federal funding for housing, municipal funding for fire stations. But if we're already cracking the door open to exploring multiple purposes together on one site, you could think about adding a leased or commercial space, and if that could then generate some sort of cash flow. Next slide, please. Over and above, the project-specific cash flows, though, the crucial challenge in exploring financing from my experience on this project isn't about the specifics of a particular infrastructure project, but really it's more structural. It's all of the background, the support, the on-ramp to build up to be able to take advantage of either any kind of private funding models for resilient infrastructure in a municipal context. It's a long process, potentially worthwhile, but long and involved. Even in more traditional grant funding, there's a long on-ramp and background work to coordinate municipal budget cycles and be able to jump on those funding opportunities. So when we're pushing outside of that familiar grant funding space, there's an even longer on-ramp to prepare. Part of that is getting actors beyond the sustainability department on board. So the starting point for that conversation is that these financing models aren't actually brand new for municipalities. We just haven't been talking about them in adaptation spaces. Large-scale municipal projects have used, and in Saskatoon's case, are exploring financing models like tax increment financing, facility fees, and accommodation taxes for downtown entertainment district projects. So our finance colleagues already have this expertise and they understand these models. I will never be the expert in the room on taxing financing, but my role as the adaptation specialist can be to point to those funding models that now I do know exist and say, hey, can we use one of those for an adaptation project? Right now, I think that question might be met with some raised eyebrows because we haven't fully built that on yet within the adaptation and climate space. I have steps I need to take before asking that question. And they're steps that are really building towards having more decision makers at the city on board, looking for solutions for funding with me. They establish the baseline data and the shared understanding. So this foundational work is being done here and in other cities. And some of the steps we're working on in Saskatoon include things like natural capital asset valuation. That's work that could support putting an informed dollar figure to what value surrounding properties get from restoring a wetland or a native prairie. We're working on gathering economic data to establish local costs of climate change so we could have a well-understood project ROI. And we're working on getting climate risk on everybody's radar, building up an understanding within our city of how critical and urgent adaptation is, that there isn't a livable future in cities without a massive input of capital into adaptation. With this base built up, we then consider moving on to the next step of our financing on-ramp and looking to the resources ICLEI is sharing today to build out what projects could be a match. I don't expect Saskatoon to be the first to pilot these financing models for adaptation. I'm secretly hoping some other communities move faster and pave the way for us. But we're working on the on-ramp, and I think we will get there. With that, thank you, and I'll pass the mic back over to the City of Laval.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you very much for showing us the 3 to 4 projects. And feel free to, if you have questions for the speakers and also to Chad and Paul, Erin, and Dominique shortly, feel free to add those in the chat and we'll get to those shortly at our Q&A session. And with that, our second municipality that will be presenting from the FRIP project is the city of Laval. So Dominique, I think you should be good to go and the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Adrián. Hi, everyone. So I'm very happy to join you today in this webinar. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please, right now. Thank you. At first, I'll start with a few words on Laval. Laval is a city in Quebec province located in the suburbs of Montreal. With a population exceeding the 4,000 people, Laval is the third largest city in the province of Quebec, after Montreal and Quebec City. It's also one of the regions in Quebec with the highest population growth. Laval is an island bordered by 2 rivers. The risk of flooding, especially in the spring, is real for the building along the shore. And this is why 2 of our projects aim to respond at this climatic event. Next slide, please. The city of Laval experienced significant flooding in 2017, 2019, and to a lesser extent last year, affecting 19 areas through open water floods and sewer backups. The damages were substantial and some homes still remain at high risk of flooding. In response to these floods, Ville de Laval developed an emergency response plan, including a population alert system, distribution of sandbags, temporary protection measures like dikes. However, deploying these temporary measures during flooding events require considerable resources and cannot fully protect all areas. Due to uncertainties in flow forecasts, for example, and the risk associated with delays in deployment, permanent measures are necessary. Then the municipality initiated a resilience program to reduce flood risk, mapping out risk and exporting various mitigation measures from large gray infrastructure to nature-based solutions, such as building dikes, relocating building and restoring wetlands, or enhancing home resilience, all of which come with significant financial cost. These measures are expected to yield some co-benefits like converting private riverbanks into public spaces, demineralizing some sector for improved resilience, and make it accessible to citizens, enhancing the natural and recreational value of the riverbanks. Next slide, please. So to finance this project, we look at the taxation option based on the increase in property value. And the proximity of the large riverside that now in the now protect residences. Next slide, please. The other project is an evaluation of home resilience to flooding. The idea of this project is to create and implement a process for assessing residential flood resilience, allowing residents in flood-prone areas to understand the vulnerability of their homes to water damage. Certified home inspector will conduct assessment to identify these vulnerabilities, providing participants with a detailed report. This report will also suggest adaptation strategies and how to implement them. Additionally, the city would like to gain insight into common weaknesses in local homes, the cost of adaptation strategies, and the potential for integrating home assessment into a permanent municipal programs. These findings will be shared with the provincial government, which is in the process of reviewing floodplain regulation. Through this project, citizens will increase their awareness, preparedness, and resilience to flood risk. They will also gain knowledge about available financial programs at different government levels. Ultimately, this initiative aims to reduce household damage costs, leading to better control over insurance costs and availability. Next slide, please. For this project, we look at the pay style program that could provide homeowners with very low interest rates loans to implement the suggested renovation from their evaluation. The interest could then be kept in the specific fund or reinvest. Next slide, please. Our last project is the Parc de l'Innovation du Carré Laval. Carré Laval is situated in downtown Laval and was once a limestone quarry. The city plans to transform it into an innovative eco-district with mixed-use development, emphasizing sustainability and low-carbon footprint. This includes accommodating research companies, startup, and residential building alongside local services. The development will evolve around a large regional park and pedestrian-friendly public spaces. The project is a response to a pressing needs for green and public spaces in downtown Laval area. This highly mineralized portion of the city is set to transform and densify over the coming years. But there are problems of urban heat island and saturation of water service infrastructure for that development. This future park will then be an oasis of fresh air in this area. Next slide, please. To finance this project, the city might look at leasing revenue and revenue from the implementation of a smart energy grid. Next slide. So now the challenges we face through financing this project, but I think the biggest challenge, and I see that I didn't even mention it in my slides, is finding funding. City facing floods have limited options, such as building dikes, relocating building, or enhancing home resilience, all of which will come with significant financial cost. Without such measure, recurring floods result in extensive damage and financial strain to the city and its residents. Moreover, homes in flood-prone areas are now struggling to secure insurance, and fewer financial institutions are offering loans in these areas. So now municipality seeks to regulatory evolution and increase funding from federal and provincial government to better respond to such an event. This is a big challenge. Then when it's come to this specific project, one of our main challenge was, I think, calculating the right return on investment for our project. For flood prevention project, it was relatively easier as we already had some data on the damage avoided. However, for the urban park project, it's proved to be more difficult. We all understand the benefits of creating a urban park in a city center. It's common sense. But quantifying the economic benefits, such as reduce urban heat, decrease healthcare costs, improve air quality, or reduce the pluvial flooding is very challenging. Nevertheless, it's crucial to determine the right return on investment for financing purpose. Also, investing in projects that address potential future risk, whether in infrastructure for climate adaptation or preventive healthcare measure, for example, often face challenges in demonstrating immediate return on the investment. Another challenge we encountered was legal barrier. Through this project, we discovered that certain innovative financing mechanisms, like the PACE program, were not permitted in Quebec. This might require legislative change in the future. And as my colleague from Saskatoon mentioned, there is also an administrative barrier to using new financial tools within the municipal administration. Lastly, developing robust adaptation indicator to guide and reassure investors pose another challenge. Calculating adaptation indicator is challenging due to the absence of a standardized methodology. Without a common approach, it's difficult to measure the effectiveness of our action and measure the progress. This lack of consistency makes it challenging to compare our effort with those of other cities, for example, and demonstrate to investors that we will meet our objective. Next slide, please. So now what we have learned from this project. Firstly, we've gained a valuable insight into new financial tools for our municipal project. For instance, we've explored a program like PACE and tax incremental financing. We've also considered methodologies for calculating return on investment. ICLEI Toolkit has guided us in asking the right question and understanding what to include in our funding requests. Moreover, we realized the importance of having supporting data to assess project risk beforehand. It's crucial to have these data readily available. And while qualitative data is abundant, quantitative figures are equally essential. We're just right now initiating a study to evaluate the benefit of Laval natural assets, and it will help us fill funding questionnaire. Lastly, we have learned that certain things must be in place at the municipal level before pursuing private investment. It seems challenging in Quebec to secure private funding. We had historically bad experiences with private-public co-financing, so people are less confident, I'll say, in those kind of financing. And even federal financing requires provincial approval for Quebec municipalities. Also, the legal framework appears to be underdeveloped, leaving city uncertain about their capabilities and limitation on financing. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for sharing the challenges and some of the learnings as well from the projects that Laval chose to develop throughout the FRIP project. I see there's two short questions for both Dominique and Erin. Perhaps I can read them out very shortly. So for Dominique, John is wondering in the chat, is the flooding risk mostly from high river levels, or has there been localized flooding from torrential rain?
Oh, it's from high level river, high river levels. As in springtime, yes, okay. Mainly.
All right, thank you. And one for Erin as well. John is also wondering if the first project, the dry pond infrastructure you've showed on the image, is that a render or a built project?
That's a built project. That is the first of the dry ponds, and I think we have 3 built now. the third is under construction. I'm just going to post a link in the chat to the website about them in case anybody's excited to learn more.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erin. Thank you both for the very insightful presentations on the projects that you've worked on in the past 14 months or so. With that, I will now pass it to Eva, who will introduce the Getting Ready to Finance Toolkit, for which I'm sure many of you have joined us today to learn about. With that, Eva, over to you.
Thanks, Adrián. Hi, everyone. We are so excited always when you get to this point in a project where we working with a small number of municipalities to share the results that'll be of broad applicability, hopefully to hundreds of municipalities across the country. So we're really excited and delighted to be at this point. And of course, for the partnership and support from cooperators in enabling us to play in this innovative space and learn a lot and pivot. And it's been really fascinating and really rewarding to do this work. So perhaps I'll start with just some broad comments and that situate these resources and situate the project a little bit. And what we really want to show is that resilience thinking needs to be incorporated into all aspects of municipal planning and growth. And this is one mechanism to do that through infrastructure, and infrastructure that maybe isn't thought of as typically specific to climate change adaptation and resilience, but could incorporate adaptation and resilience benefits. And so I think Erin's example of the fire station or a new community center, something like that, how I could integrate those pieces. And really, and again, this touches on a point raised by Chad and Paul around a whole of society approach, that these approaches to resilient infrastructure, they need to include mechanisms that can be used to acquire, structure, govern, and allocate financial resources to that infrastructure. And that those financial resources must come from a variety of sources. So that to complement traditional sources of public funding, be that through the federal government, provincial governments, territorial governments, philanthropic sources, accompanied by financing from financial institutions, private investors, institutional inventors, as a way to blend that, to help us scale at the pace that we need to in order to meet the climate change challenge. So in doing this work, we learned a number of high overarching lessons, which we hope are reflected in these individual resources. And certainly, I was so happy to hear a lot of them reflected in the lessons that Erin and Dominique shared around bringing all hands on deck and bringing all perspectives around the table, involving colleagues from particularly that finance department early on and early in that process is a way that will most likely to yield success in terms of resourcing resilient infrastructure projects. Each of these professions approach infrastructure from a different perspective, and bringing those people together early on when they can ideate and design projects and reflect on innovative ways to finance is a critical success factor. That requires building a bit of a collective language. And that was maybe one piece that really became clear to me. When we use these terms like to fund a project or to finance a project, those terms fund and finance mean different things to different audiences. So it's really important when we're bringing people together to create a common vernacular or taxonomy or nomenclature, whatever you want to call it, that just says, when I say this word, this is what it means. We really learned the importance and nuance of words in doing this project. The other piece that I think is really important, and again, this was particularly alluded to in some of the examples, is considering the direct and indirect benefits and beneficiaries of a project. When you build that stormwater retention pond that Erin was describing, there's direct beneficiaries of the people who live in and around the area. But if roads are protected, who is using those roads? Who's moving through them? What businesses benefit from more protection? So helping to think about those direct and indirect beneficiaries really helps to understand how else a project could be resourced. And again, whether that's through third-party public funding, through private investment, through a reallocation of municipal funding, even internally, which was another piece that we really tried to explore through this project. And then the last thing, which may seem obvious, is, hard things are hard. And while approaching this project at the start, we felt really overwhelmed of, will we be able to identify projects that could be, that could present a return on investment for a private financial investment. It felt overwhelming and daunting, but as we moved through, it suddenly became clear to us that it is doable. It is doable to identify those beneficiaries. It is doable to identify some possible sources of cash flows and to, widen that crack of how we typically finance and fund infrastructure. It is by no means easy, and very much hard work at times, but it requires an openness to think differently about projects and to think differently in order to address a challenge. And maybe that's something we can pull a little bit from the pandemic and the learning we did, that when you're faced with an enormous challenge, if you think differently and take down some of those barriers of, well, this is the way we've always done things, new and really innovative things can happen. And I think that's a lesson we've seen in the pandemic, quite simply from remote work. And realizing that in pre-pandemic times, an option, not with some reality. So I just want to say that courage and openness to work differently is one of the underlying, perhaps softer elements that's required in order to make progress on this. So with that, maybe we'll launch into Adrián pushing forward on the on introducing the individual product. So the first piece that we'd like to introduce are the examples of resilient infrastructure projects. So you heard from Saskatoon and Laval today on some of the examples that they created or that they identified, but all of the projects that participants came up with are amassed in this collection. So they are examples of resilient infrastructure projects that could be realized with innovative financing mechanisms to support their implementation. It's a collection of short case stories of those projects that are organized by the hazard that they address. And we hope will spur on ideas that can be carried forward into project planning and then potentially feasibility and or implementation. I should mention that all of the resources presented are available in both English and French, and I believe my colleagues have been using the chat to populate links so that you can directly access these. So again, this first one is sort of the recipe book, a collection of projects that could be implemented. It's meant to give ideas and to showcase the types of projects that came through our Financing Resilient Infrastructure project. Next slide. The next piece then, once your appetite has been wet in order to dream up new projects, the ideation guide is an Excel-based resource that's designed to help municipal staff identify and prioritize potential projects. So it's an Excel spreadsheet where you can, again, through answering the questions that are in each sheet, identify multiple projects that address the hazards that your community is currently facing. So there's a lot of drop-down menus, there's some free-form text, but it's really meant to guide you through that process of generating infrastructure project ideas for a number of hazards. Our participants really had success doing this with groups of people around the table, as opposed to individuals at their own computers. The idea was to bring together colleagues from both the public works department, from sustainability, from parks, to generate ideas together and to start finding where those projects nest between various departments. The last sheet in this Excel file is a bit of an exercise in prioritizing, so that one could get from a long list of 10, 15, or 20 projects down to a shorter list of projects that should be prioritized, for which the next resource one could use. And that prioritization, there's multiple criteria included in that, and again, a scoring evaluation for how to decide that, but it's around political appetite, the degree to which the idea addresses the hazard it's meant to address, the long-term sustainability of the project, the feasibility of the project, and all those are well documented and laid out. So again, the first resource is about generating some ideas to get people thinking about infrastructure projects. This one then is meant to create your own long list of projects that could potentially be realized in your community. The next resource is, once you have that prioritization done, which you remember is the last sheet in that Excel file. This is the project preparation template. And this is really for that short list of projects to start thinking through, what are the things I need to understand about this project to really be able to get this project resourced. And I say resourced because we wanted to design this template so that the information within it could be used to help municipalities pursue private financing, if that was something that they were interested in pursuing as part of that blending finance and public funding model, or to be able to help prepare applications into traditional sources of public funding. So whether that be through the Green Municipal Fund, through the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund, through Infrastructure Canada, through Public Safety Canada. So this project preparation template was created by looking at all the major funding applications that exist nationally and across many of the provinces, and say, what are the questions that are common to all of these applications? And can we create some guidance around how to answer those questions? So more on that in a minute. So this project preparation template, this is a Word document that again is in both English and French, that has all those questions that are common across multiple funding programs. So if you wanted to get a project funded or financed, completing this would give you all the information, or the vast majority of the information you might need in order to submit that to a funder or to open a conversation around private investment into your project. So we really see this project preparation template to be used in conjunction with the next element of the toolkit, which is the template instructions. So this is all the details that you need in order to complete the template. And casually in talking about this, I was referring to this like passport application. I'm sure many of you have done this, where you've got the passport application is the first 2 pages, and then there's 6 pages of instructions about how to exactly fill it out and what content should be included. So we imagine that these 2 things would be used in tandem, that you would have both open on a screen, and as you're at question 17, you would look into the instructions for, here's the guiding information and some examples for how to answer question 17. So these are really designed to be used simultaneously. And I think you'll be able to see now how the toolkit all comes together to get someone from, I don't quite know where to start to address flooding, overland flooding in my community. You could look at the examples to find some examples of what came through this project. There are many other places online where you can get case studies and ideas, but within these toolkit, we have these 21 examples. You could then use the ideation sheet, the Excel file, to come up with your own long list of actions that might be relevant for your community. Use the prioritization element within that Excel sheet to get from that long list that you generated with your colleagues to a short list, and then use the project preparation template and the instructions to get from that short list to completed project profiles for the 3, 4, 5 projects you might want to pursue for resourcing in your community. So that is really how the toolkit sort of works together in order to get someone from, I need a solution, to have the information. Now, I should caveat, this isn't a quick activity. I don't think this is something somebody could get done from that first bit to the next in 3, 4, 5 days. This is an exercise over a period of time But we know that there's resourcing coming for infrastructure projects through budgets that have been talked about. Having these project profiles ready and even partially completed will put you at a great advantage in terms of being ready to apply for some of that funding that is coming through, you know, federal or provincial governments, and also to continue having those conversations locally that are required in order to pursue private financing. So you can think about direct and indirect beneficiaries and have that conversation. As Erin said, if you're meeting with your colleagues from finance, you could say, you know, I know we have this, we've used tax increment financing for this. Could we apply it to this adaptation example? And by having these ready, these profiles ready, you might be just that little bit further to have that conversation. So Adrián, I'll stop there and maybe ask you to guide people through how to download and then get us into our conversation when ready.
Thank you very much, Eva, for presenting the different resources. And yes, while you were presenting, our colleagues were putting all the links in the chat as well. But all the resources are also available on one space, which is the Getting Ready to Finance Toolkit webpage. We will add that direct link into the chat right now, where you'll be able to download all of these. Also, just a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be shared as well after we close up the webinar with all the links as well. Now with that, we've explored the new resources of the toolkit and heard experiences from the two municipalities, cooperators, and let's dive into the last part of the webinar, which is the panel discussion on innovative financing solutions. Now, before we dive into our discussion, just a reminder for our audience, if you have questions for the panelists and speakers, please add those in the chat below, and we'll get to as many as we can shortly. Now, to start things off, I will turn to maybe Erin and Dominique. During your presentations, you already mentioned some of the challenges that you faced developing these projects. And we were wondering if there were any challenges that you haven't anticipated before starting the projects.
I can get us going. I think the example I have is maybe not something that was unanticipated, but this project really added further evidence to the challenge that we already knew about and it's been talked about, I think, from everyone here today, is the importance of quantified numbers and how hard those are to get. So we know we need detailed localized costs of climate change. We need to know the costs of the projects. And then the trickier piece is we need to figure out how to quantify what we get from doing an infrastructure project, which is particularly hard when you're looking at natural infrastructure solutions. And we don't want to leave those types of solutions, you know, off to the corner because they're hard to quantify, because we also know that those are some of our best solutions in many cases. So we need those numbers to demonstrate when it's a quantifiable win. And conveniently, in this project, that was our major stumbling block, but it's also data we need for everything else in adaptation. So even though I can't exclusively putting my time into exploring these new innovative financing tools, I can be getting that data for other purposes that might help us further down the line.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Dominique?
Yeah, I think about the same, the calculating the real return on the investment and the damage avoided. And I think it's difficult also to demonstrate like the value of investing in something that hasn't yet occurred. Like I said, if like preventive health, it's the same for for me. And maybe something new that I haven't said in my presentation, maybe could be like involving a challenge for us, maybe was involving our finance colleague to make the process like more official. But I think it's something we have to work on that side, because it's very important that they are involved in that processes.
Absolutely, and even in the toolkit itself, in the documents, we do talk about the importance of bringing in different departments as well. At the very start of the projects, even in that brainstorming element and kind of ideation parts of which projects could be potentially brought forward then into the shortlisted project. Maybe let's turn now to one question from the audience. And that's, I see an interesting one here. Is there an effort being made to have municipalities value green infrastructure, such as tree boulevards and parks, on their balance sheet?
I would say there absolutely is. The Natural Assets Initiative exists to do a lot of that work, right? To do not only natural asset inventory, but then that valuation of the services that those natural assets provide, both from their function as stormwater retention, but as well as and I don't want to say softer, but the other beneficial services they provide beyond just to that flooding piece. And so, that there's a long history of that around ecosystem valuation. I know the city of Saskatoon is engaged in some of that, and Erin, you mentioned that. I know others have been involved with Natural Assets Initiative, previously Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, in part of that work. So I'll open it to colleagues who may or may not be working in this space. It wasn't necessarily the core function of our project to do that. Certainly many of the ideas generated were around natural infrastructure, but not in terms of solely their valuation and including them on a balance sheet within the municipality. I don't know, Erin, if you want to add anything from the City of Saskatoon's experience. Oh, and I see Paul's indicating there too.
Yeah, I think you've captured it, Eva. There are efforts going on. I think it'll be a while before it makes its way onto an official balance sheet, but it is very much being tackled by our green infrastructure teams as a tool to just start demonstrating, the broad value of these resources. And then we start using those in city budgeting, at least in business cases, when we're putting forward options to say, if you're building out a new development and you protect this natural asset instead of giving that space over to development, this is the value that you get to the rest of that development. And maybe it's then worth more than the new houses you could build on that space. Paul,
I noted that, oh, sorry, Erin. I noted that Justin also referenced some of the work that Dark Matter Labs has been doing on the value of a public tree, and not only to the municipality necessarily, but also to individual homeowners. Trees Ontario has been doing this work here in Ontario, as well as Nature Canada has been doing some of that work. What are the values that trees in those cases specifically provide? So there's lots of efforts in this space. Paul, I wonder if you have some other examples as well to share.
Sure. Yeah, actually, thanks, Eva and Erin. Yeah, trees specifically, all natural infrastructure, but trees are a particular interesting kind of question and issue to deal with, because I think the idea of recording values on a balance sheet is one thing, but you can kind of look at value in different ways, and in almost it has different applicability. The discussion around value has different applicability. So, value in the contrast of financial accounting, of recording asset values is one thing. I do agree with Erin. I think it'll be a long time until that kind of makes it onto a, GAAP or, somewhat GAAP financial statement. But I think the recognition of value of let's call it just trees as an example from an operational context, is an element to then crafting some of these innovative solutions around bringing finance. So we really understand what the value of that tree is, or other piece of natural infrastructure. We can then think about, we've been looking at some activities around nature-based solutions as an effort really to reduce overall operational expense on public waterworks, departments. And so, well-designed natural assets can then alleviate, stormwater flows or other flows, which then make maintenance, cheaper. And so then thinking about how to wrap that all together, is of value. But one other related point I did want to bring up is really around, thinking about asset values and private capital. And I know I'm not sure we were going to get to this, Eva, but I'll make the point anyway. One of the areas of discussion we had during the FRIP process was really around this question of investment. I think, Eva, you alluded to it before about, language and taxonomy. And I think, Erin, you said yesterday, words are important. And it's true. So I think it's important for all participants in projects like this to consider that when the private sector talks about investment, they really are talking about a financial return on their capital. It's not to say that there aren't pockets of capital that are out there, whether it's from the philanthropic sector, the foundation sector, and some of the work that Cooperators does through its citizenship, projects. But that's not really private investment capital. And so I think one of the challenges, frankly, the industry has had, and where some of the stumbles have been, is where we conflate dollars that don't come directly from a municipality or the feds or the province as quote unquote investment dollars. And I think part of what I think the FRIP was trying to get at is there are opportunities. I think you need to think creatively, but there are opportunities to generate actual financial return on investment, putting aside all the other benefits that accrue to whether it's nature-based infrastructure or the like. But it's that context that's kind of required to have those discussions, because, at least at some of the early meetings, I think there was a little bit of, talking across from one another in terms of what the private sector was thinking that they would get out of, some of these projects and what municipalities were looking for.
Thank you, Paul. I also see another question here which caught my eye, and it is, as part of this project, did you come across any data or include any information about potential reductions in insurance premiums or increased eligibility for insurance coverage as a benefit of the selected adaptation projects?
I can jump in there. I think certainly when we're talking about the need to identify potential cash flows, that tricky situation of the overall economic case of prevention being there, but the cash flows not necessarily being there for the infrastructure in a lot of cases. Our findings are that it's going to have to be a mix of measures in most cases that will generate the sufficient the opportunities, I guess, for sufficient cash flows. So insurance premium reductions could certainly be one of the sources of those, depending, of course, on the particular project, and organizations like ours can model those and can kind of understand the scale and scope of those potential interventions in terms of what the impact would be. In most cases, I won't go into too much detail, but I'll just say in most cases, those aren't likely to be sufficient to pay off the full thing. Those are just not at a scale generally that'll be sufficient. But it certainly, could be part of the mix, and I think that's one of the opportunities we should always have on the table as we're exploring potential solutions in any particular project.
I would only add to that, Chad, that I recall, and Paul, I'm sure will remember this, it was the first one that all the participants went to when we started thinking about cash flows. It was the first one where we were like, well, if we do this, then our premiums will come down. We can use that. So I think that was another example of where if you actually bring together the people who understand insurance as a mechanism and the people who are creating the interventions together, you can quickly kind of step back expectations from one or ideas from one to align with the reality from the people who are producing that insurance product or regulating that product or whatever that might be. So to me, an interesting one where that is, of course, where my mind went to. And when we first started this project 14, 15 months ago, and now really has evolved into other sources that generate revenue as opposed to just avoid spending. So I just wanted to add that as an observation.
Thank you, Eva. And I see there's a lot of questions coming in. Please feel free to add more. Really great that there's resources as well being shared in the chat as well. There is a question, what do you think the provincial and federal governments could do to support municipalities in pursuing innovative financing solutions?
I can jump in. But for our case in Quebec, where we look at the PACE style program for financing renovation, resilient renovation on flooding, of course, the provincial government could look at change the regulation on that on that side, so to allow for the municipality to get the option of doing it if it's the right things to do. As well, I know for these kind of program, there's some financing from the federal government to put in place this kind of program if it's mixed with eco-energetic efficiency. So it could be nice so Quebec province could use it. As well, I'm sorry, I just lost my idea. So continue and I'll come back if it's come back.
I think maybe one innovative approach could be for some funding that comes without a complicated grant application for municipalities. That's not supporting private financing, but on any of this, I think the really important piece to keep in mind is how much complexity a small climate action team or even just a municipality in general can be managing, and that we are pushing forward what might be considered innovative solutions across many different portfolios all at once. And just keeping that in the back of minds of how many layers of complexity and funding can a municipality realistically juggle at one time, adding to the chorus of just, we desperately need to be putting money towards adaptation. We're going to keep trying to chase every possible thing we can, but we need support on making it simple. And so I guess maybe somewhere where a collective body, whether that's a federal or provincial government or someone like cooperators could be, or ICLEI, providing, the data that we need. Is there, I know on a DMAP application, we did some back of the napkin calculations and scraped what data we could find to say how many lives are going to be saved by planting X numbers of trees. And we needed that number, so we came up with something, but that's something that could be known Canada-wide, just at our fingertips.
Yeah, sorry, Chad, I see you unmuted, but I'll go really quick and toss you the baton. One of the things that I think was really important that we learned is that a lot of the barriers to accessing financing or funding were non-monetary. It wasn't that there was no idea of where to turn to for resourcing. It was some of the non-monetary obstacles to accessing that. And so we've spoken about information from Erin's answer there, right? Some assistance with the return on investment or the costs of inaction, what it would cost if we don't do this, is a way, again, to provide information that supports either a funding application or a presentation of kind of the benefits of doing this project on to a private investor. But then, as Dominique alluded to, some of those structural barriers that exist for municipalities doing this. If you, through regulation, cannot create a PACE program, eliminates that entire option as a way to generate revenue, either with cash flow to a private investor. So I think there's those structural barriers that Dominique alluded to in Quebec that exist in all provinces. They're different in every province, but there is some sort of barrier that exists. But there's also, I think, political barriers, and that we need to do some capacity building at the political level around openness to innovation and openness to doing things differently. messaging, and just general capacity building around integrating resilience into all aspects of municipal decision making. That alone would open up different sources of revenue if we built resilience into all aspects of service delivery and program design and infrastructure design. So I think there's all sorts of non-monetary obstacles that both federal, provincial governments, non-governmental organizations, private companies, cooperatives could be working on that would all lead to making this process easier. Many hands make lighter work, and everybody has different elements that they can be doing to help unlock this puzzle. So working kind of together in as much of a collective model to take down the structural barrier, or help take down the structural barriers, to help provide information that's required for these applications, to streamline the applications, right? If a municipality could just submit one application and that would meet all the information that's required for different federal funders, that would already be a massive step forward. So I think we need to not only think about the monetary barriers to implementation, but the non-monetary ones, which we learned through this project, represent a large part of the obstacle. Chad?
I'm glad you went first, Eva, because that was a great answer. In particular, the point about all, the role that provincial governments, for example, can play in helping remove barriers that surface here. I was just going to make the point, building on what Erin had said about municipal capacity building. I just think in general, we're talking about new ways of structuring and organizing projects, and in particular financing a project. And we've heard many examples here of some of the barriers that municipalities face in just sort of building up the capacities to be able to take on that challenge. So I do think there's a role for federal and provincial governments in supporting municipal governments in capacity building kind of efforts like that. Green municipal funds out of FCM is an example. Obviously, projects like this are a great example. And I think just generally advocating, using the voice of government to advocate for a possible role for private investors in these kinds of projects. I think the default is often to just assume that the federal government is, for example, going to provide the granting, or should provide the granting, and if we can get grants, we should, but also they can help illuminate the possibility of matching funds, or a role, just in general, a role for private investors as well.
Thank you, Chad. And I see Paul. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I'll just pick up on Chad's comment. I'll make one more, maybe slightly more controversial comment, which is, in addition to everything, that Chad talked about around advocating around, reducing some of those barriers and kind of program design. I do think at the federal and the provincial level, more does need to be talked about, but just the risks that are increasing. I think, it's probably never good, election sloganeering, to talk about all the problems we have. But I think, look, we Erin, to your point about a snowstorm in March and everyone being happy about it, it's 17 degrees in Toronto today. And I think, we all need to acknowledge the fact that, the climate is changing. We don't even have to get into the political debate about why it is changing, although it seems pretty obvious. But, the reality is it is changing. Our cities, large and small, cities and towns are facing challenges. And, the sooner that I think everyone acknowledges the challenge that are out there, the sooner we can turn our attention to solutions. Again, fundamentally, investing in, and this is where I use investing, I think, in the right context, investing in preventative actions is a great return on investment. And, but it only really happens once it gets brought to the forefront. So, advocacy and discussion around what this world, really looks like increasingly, I think, is a necessary step. Sorry, Eva, I didn't want to get political, but I had to.
Thank you, Paul. And yeah, this is great. I think the question was spot on. And I just wanted to bring up one more question as we are coming close. I'm looking at the time as well. Wondering if all of you could share very briefly what are the next steps as we are wrapping up this project, FRIP 2.0. How does that look like, and what would you like the project to evolve in? Yeah.
Maybe I'll start with a bit of my wish list as we're thinking about where to go from here. And some of it is actually alluded in some of the questions that have been popping up. There was a question that came in, have we looked to global examples of how the business cases were built for some of the large resilient infrastructure projects? And I think of some of the ones in the Netherlands, protecting a very low-lying country from a lot of the risks that our municipalities are mentioning. So I think some research around large municipal infrastructure projects and how the business cases were built for those, realizing though that applying for funding and financing is very context specific. We know that development banks fund this sort of thing in developing countries quite regularly for many different reasons beyond just resilience. So I think a study like that could be quite interesting. I think building on this idea around exploring the non-monetary obstacles and bringing together different organizations and different entities working at this at different scales is a really important piece. We saw today the Task Force on Climate and Housing released their recommendations. I think having something like that evolve in that, what are the leading people working around resilient infrastructure, whether from the public side, the private side, or groups like the Municipal Finance Authority of BC. I noticed there was an intervention in the Q&A there from Alison, bringing together groups working at this at different scales to explore what needs to happen and to identify solutions to some of the challenges brought up by the participants in this project and many other municipalities from across the country. So bringing together a group like that from across disciplines, I think could be a really interesting thing to continue. And then to continue to socialize these ideas. So, having ourselves or others offer webinars and trainings on how to identify resilient infrastructure projects, how to complete these profiles, how to have those conversations internally and start working with municipalities to bring together those actors locally who hold different pieces of that puzzle to try and design projects that really multi-solve, that don't only solve a climate problem, but create co-benefits and create many direct and indirect beneficiaries. I think there's a whole school of capacity building that needs to happen to that. We have these resources. We know posting them on our website isn't enough, so designing some training in cohorts of municipalities doing this together again would be a great evolution from our perspective.
Thank you, Eva, for sharing your insights. Anyone else? Maybe from the municipality side, how would you like the FRIP 2.0 to head towards?
I can just say that this project was very important for us. We've learned a lot. So I think climate risks are there. So, and there will be more and more infrastructure project for adaptation to the municipality, and they are all very costly. So I think just continuing this discussion on innovative project financing is very important, just for municipality to get all the option of financing available for this project, because public fund won't be enough, I think. So just continuing the discussion for me. That's the point.
I'll build on that and on Eva, your comment on socializing these ideas. I think for me, the next step is moving out from where we're talking right now within the sustainability worlds to looking at it maybe from taking this over back into the world of finance with our partners there within the finance departments, that we, we're able to start those conversations within the context of this project. But I think there's room to push it back over to, we're starting to explore from the sustainability world, the world of finance, and understanding how to talk and work in that space. And I think maybe there's work to do in the finance world to push those actors in our direction. And then in terms of our role as municipalities, I think research collaboration between us is really where we could get the most bang for our buck. I think hard work is hard, as you said, Eva. We've got lots of really difficult things that we need to be researching individually. We're looking at trying to all on our own figure out what natural infrastructure gets us in terms of benefits and dollar figures. And if there's a way that we can move outside of our traditional bubbles, and it's always a tricky thing to try to figure out how we do that within the constraints of our work and our roles, but can I work within the climate region of the prairies or our ecosystem to, instead of doing an individual research study, partner with folks across the prairies and say, this is what the prairie natural infrastructure value is, not just specific to Saskatoon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Erin and Dominique. Maybe for as a closer, we have another 3 minutes. I hand it back to Paul and Chad. Any final thoughts on where FRIP 2.0 could head to?
Thanks, Adrian. I mean, I think this has been great. We have a really good sense of the issues now. We know the problem. We know some of the challenges, the barriers, and I think we've got a sense of where some of the possible solutions are as well. So, from my perspective, it's time. Now next stage is really to begin innovating and testing solutions and trying things out and so on. So, part of that is really on a project level, like rolling up our sleeves, and then and part of it is also, while we're doing that, working to try to tackle some of the systemic barriers that have been raised here. I know, in other contexts, I find useful to have collaborations and multi-stakeholder, when we're advocating, let's say, to governments or to other stakeholders and so on. So I think that could be an interesting focal point for follow-up activity.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much, Chad. I will now move back to my slides. And yeah, I just wanted to mention as a wrap up that today's recording of the webinar will be available together with all the toolkit resources as a downloadable PDF on the Getting Ready to Finance Toolkit website. And we will also send these to all participants of the webinar through an email follow-up very shortly. So you will be able to access these resources or share it with colleagues that wish to join the webinar today, but were not able to. If you would like to hear more about the resources or stay in touch with ICLEI Canada for future similar toolkits and events, feel free to subscribe to our newsletter or join the conversation on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to stay connected with us. And with that, I don't see any more questions in the chat. I think we managed to get to as many we could. And I would like to thank Erin, Dominique, Chad, Paul, the ICLEI team, as well as all of the other FRIP participants and partners on the line for your really engaged and thoughtful participation. Thank you also for all of you for joining us today for the webinar. And keep an eye on that follow-up email from our team, where you will be able to access all the information and links mentioned and shared today. Thank you, everyone, for joining.